The Edmonton Oilers have clinched their ticket to the Stanley Cup Final, eliminating the Dallas Stars in 6 games. Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers is here to talk about that and the keys to victory and the Oilers winning their first Stanley Cup since 1990. We've got all that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Oilers, Nick Zararis. And Nick, a great moment for Oilers fans and for the organization. They are back in the Stanley Cup Final after eliminating the Dallas Stars. And let's just start with this. What is the mood in Edmonton right now?
I was thinking about what I would compare this to, and the quote that keeps coming back to me is there's a 30 for 30 about the Auburn-Alabama document of rivalry, where Gene Chizik, the Auburn coach, when they finally won the national title in 2020, they broke the drought 50-something years. He talks about it comes down to a field goal, whatever, and it's just, what a moment. Everything it took to get here. You talk about they haven't been there since the first year out of the lockout, 05-06, where they lost to Carolina in 7. They went through about as lean as you can possibly get as an organization. All the first overall picks, not all those guys hit, a couple of different head coaches, quite a litany of the goalies you could find on the goalie carousel. And to contextualize all of that, I mean, the narratives coming into the season were, if the team isn't good, is Draisaitl going to want to leave? Is McDavid going to want to leave? Now, I think you can put a kibosh on a lot of that. I think you really got to putting a moment like this in the proper context is really difficult because the Oilers haven't been here. You know, last year, 2 years ago, they made the conference final and Colorado blew their doors off. Colorado swept them out in 4 games, and that was against Pavel Francois. It's not like it was Darcy Kemper who befuddled the Oilers. To get this far, and it sounds weird to say because Ken Holland's almost certainly going to take another job, but this is kind of a validation of his vision for this group. It's not how you would typically build a team. It's not how you would typically want a successful team to play, but it worked. Utterly as improbably as tonight was to win with 11 shots on goal, it worked.
It certainly did. You talked about the journey for this franchise and how long it's been and how unorthodox it was. But what was different about this year's team that got them this far?
In the regular season, they had superhuman play. I mean, McDavid's always superhuman, but the way they orchestrated this team, where they basically turned Zach Hyman into the world's best net front player. You don't stumble into 50, 48, 49 goals, whatever Hyman had this year, by accident. You don't do that last year either. They got about as elite of play as you could from Zach Hyman. Nuge was really, really good on the penalty kill and on special teams, and that's really the key here. It was never whether or not McDavid or Draisaitl were going to be good enough. Obviously, they're good enough. And the other thing, and we've talked about this the few times I've been on here, Bouchard and Ekholm are as good as it comes as a first defensive pair. That's the most fundamental difference between this Oilers team and any other iteration of the Oilers in the McDavid-Draisaitl era. They have a legitimately elite first defensive pair and one of the best defensemen in the entire world in Evan Bouchard. You go back and look, 2 years ago, we're talking about Darnell Nurse and Duncan Keith. Before that, we're talking Oscar Klefbom, who, good defenseman, solid player. Unfortunate his career got cut short, but he's not a number 1 defenseman. He's a number 3, number 4. That's the difference. They actually have guys reasonably slotted where they need to be. And for the first time, it really feels like they have a coach who kind of feels what they need. And it's weird because anytime Sportsnet cuts to Chris Knobloch, he looks like he's just watching paint dry. He doesn't react in the slightest. He's totally even, totally mellow, which is really different from a lot of the guys on the team. You know, we're all very aware how hard McDavid and Draisaitl are on themselves. When things have gone wrong in the past, they're not shy about, we really let ourselves down. The body language isn't there. The answers are very curt and short. It means a lot. And to put it all together the way they have, remember, they were in dead last at the second week of November, and they had to fire the coach, Jay Woodcroft, who had a great year last year. The Oilers had their best regular season, I want to say, in 5 or 6 years last year, and they had to fire that coach because of how bad a start they got off to. It's really remarkable they were able to find a way, and the story, it's really awesome. Just, you try and contextualize how hard it is to get here, especially for a team like Edmonton that has had difficulties in roster construction, some external stuff with guys, injuries, careers getting cut short, guys not panning out. To put it all together the way they have, you got to feel, even if you're not an Edmonton person, even if you're not in on Canada breaking their drought, you got to feel on some human level that 10, 15 years of the Oilers being miserable built up to this point.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Stuart Skinner, what he did. I mean, you look at the shots on goal, and you alluded to it earlier, but in this game, Edmonton is outshot 35-10, and yet they managed to win the game. Skinner with 34 saves. What has he meant to this team in this playoff run?
There was real conjecture of, should you start Calvin Pickard in game 6 of the last round? There was real consideration of, can we do this? Because that was really the concern with going to Pickard in the first place, was, would that do too much to Skinner's confidence in that you wouldn't be able to go back to him at all? And he has unequivocally answered the bell. I think the biggest key for him and for the Oilers at large has been playing with a lead. When he plays with a lead, he's a little bit more comfortable. He's a little bit less jittery. When they're trailing or it's a tie game, that's where things really seem to snowball on him, where he's really tight, he's really on edge, and it seems like just he gets in his own head a little bit too much, and that's where you let in the stinkers. And once one stinker goes in, it really gets away from you quickly, and that's what happened in the Vancouver series. So having the gumption to go to Pickard for the 2 games they did, and then coming back to Skinner, he wasn't amazing in this series against Dallas, but the last 2 games, he did what they asked him to do. If Skinner doesn't need to be the difference, the Oilers are in great shape. If he only has to play solid, the Oilers can absolutely beat anybody on any given night.
Special teams were big. Both goals in this game came on the power play. How important are special teams going to be against the Florida Panthers?
It's funny you bring that up, because against the Rangers for Florida, it wasn't really their power play. It was the even strength stuff, because the Rangers, like the Oilers, have a really good penalty kill. So I think the series looking ahead will be a little bit different, because a lot of the Oilers playoff run, it's been their really dominant penalty kill. They've killed off 46 of 49 penalties in these playoffs through all 3 rounds. They've conceded 3 power play goals in 2 months of playing playoff hockey. And that's with Stuart Skinner as their goalie, who liability at times, and, Darnell Nurse killing penalties, and Vincent Desharnais, who has not been in the lineup the last 3 games, killing penalties. That, and then the power play, it had been cold. They hadn't scored on the power play the first 4 games of this series. They scored 2 tonight, and they had 1 on Friday night. But when you get those differences, that's the difference in this series. The even strength goals were 13-12 in favor of Dallas, 4-0 power play, and then the Oilers had a shorty. That's the difference in the series. There wasn't a lot of offense to go around through these 6 games. I mean, Dallas had 13 goals in 6 games, 2.5 per game. That's really impressive defense.
No doubt about it. So what are the keys for Edmonton to capture that elusive first Stanley Cup since 1990?
Florida presents a different type of challenge than anything Edmonton has played so far, in that their star players are also just like miserable, and the type of physical you really want your star players to have, like Barkov, Reinhart, Tkachuk, Verhaeghe, Bennett. They're around the net. They're constantly on the puck. And the key for Edmonton is going to be the key to beating any team that forechecks as well as Florida does. You got to break out cleanly. If you live in your own zone too long, you're going to eventually get beat, no matter how good of your defense, no matter how good your defenders are individually, or how good you feel about your goalie. if you can't break it out cleanly, eventually Florida's forecheck is going to wear down on you.
Give me an unsung player, not a headliner, who you think could be a difference maker for the Oilers in this series.
Philip Broberg. If the Oilers stick with him, since they inserted him into the lineup, they've had, I don't want to say a total 180 from Cody Ceci, but Ceci went from being their worst defenseman to being passable, and they've reduced his workload. Broberg is not particularly big. He's not particularly fast. He's a solid skater. He recovers the puck cleanly. He's probably not going to get on the power play or the penalty kill. But if the Oilers have two functioning defensive pairs as opposed to only one, which was the problem against Vancouver, I think they're going to have a reasonable chance. I mean, Florida slowly picked apart the Rangers over the course of 6 games because the Rangers really only had one functioning defensive pair. So when the other two were out there, it was just kind of death by 1,000 cuts, where even if Florida wasn't generating quality offense, they were in the Rangers' end for long stretches of time. So that's the key for Edmonton. Don't be in your own zone too much and find ways to wear down Florida's defense. If you pick apart Florida individually, only Forsling is really good defensively. The rest of their guys are good puck movers, but if you're on them, you forecheck aggressively, you can definitely find ways to create offense.
Should be a great series. I know you'll have it covered every step of the way. Nick, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Thank you so much. Over at Locked On Oilers, been doing this 2 months, lucked into covering the team that's going to the Stanley Cup final. I should probably go buy a lottery ticket, in all honesty. Over on Twitter at Nick Zararis, Nick Zararis. Hope you guys come over and join the fun. They absolutely can beat Florida. And as Gil said, it should be an awesome series.
All right, Nick. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Hockey fans, you can use your knowledge of the NHL and the sport of hockey on FanDuel. Just head over to FanDuel and check out the odds. You may want to bet on who's going to win the Stanley Cup, who's going to be the Conn Smythe Trophy winner. Maybe you want to bet on each individual game of the Cup final. You can check out the odds for that and much, much more on FanDuel. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.